the Singleton Pattern in Unity. This video builds on a previous video of creating two different scenes and navigating between them. As a quick review, in the previous video, we created a structure where we could click on a button in one scene and then load the other scene. In this right here, we have game menu. Clicking on credits sends me to the credits scene. Notice over here, it changed in the hierarchy view. Clicking on return to menu sends us to the menu scene right here. And as some cleanup based on that previous video, I put each scene into a folder called scenes, where we have credits and menu, and put the single script, navigate menu right here, developed in the previous video, which is basically just a method where we pass it the name of the scene to load, and we use scene manager object and its method load scene to load that scene based on its name. And right here, that script is in a scripts folder. So in this video, we want to talk about the singleton pattern. So in programming, the singleton pattern is more or less what its name implies. There is a single thing. We're going to create a one thing, and it's going to exist within our project. In Unity, to convert the programming terminology into Unity terminology, we need to think about something that exists outside of a scene. That is, we want to create one thing, a single instance, and it will exist outside of a scene. Now, why is this important? This is important because when scenes load, they reload all of their game objects, which means they rerun all of their scripts, which means as a side effect, any existing values within their scripts or as part of those game objects, perhaps in their components, are reset. So in other words, when the scene reloads, the values reload. This is not particularly useful if we want to maintain data across scenes. So if the scene reloads and our data reloads and another scene reloads and our values reload, we've kind of got up a problem where things are just resetting all of the time. So we want to create something called a singleton again, or in Unity kind of terminology, we want to create something that exists outside of scenes so that we can update it during any particular scene, but that it exists outside of all of them. So we're going to create something and use these terms of a global instance. Remembering, of course, that when we create an object based on a class, we create an instance of it. So this will be a global instance of something that will exist outside of any particular scene, but again, of which any game object in any scene can interact with. So to start then, let's look at our current menu scene right here. I'm going to go ahead and create an empty game object. So right here, click on the plus dropdown, create empty. I'm going to call this game object GlobalInstance. We can create this game object called GlobalInstance by creating a new game object, as I just did. I've selected it over here in the hierarchy view. Coming over here in the inspector view, we're just going to rename it over here to GlobalInstance. The lowercase l and uppercase I kind of look the same there, and I'll press enter just to make sure this is updated over here. I could have also right-clicked this and gone to rename and done the same thing. So we have a game object called GlobalInstance right now, part of the menu scene. Now with GlobalInstance selected over here in the hierarchy view, I come over to the inspector view, and I'm going to add a new scripting component. So add component, scroll down to new script, click that. Then using the arrow keys, either pressing arrow key down twice or right twice, we want to move out of the search and into the name. So I'm going to call the name of this also GlobalInstance, matching the name of the game object. And then create and add a new script to our, down here, we see assets, and give it just a second. We'll update the name of the scripting component to, there it is, GlobalInstance. We see the name of the object is GlobalInstance over here. The script component is also named GlobalInstance. Now, I'm going to match these, the name of the game object and the name of the scripting component, just so it's easier to keep track of. I could also call it something like singleton, or settings, or player preferences, or kind of whatever we want. But in this case, it might be helpful to remember this is a global instance, and so I'm just using the name GlobalInstance for consistency and to help us visually know what it is. Oh, this is GlobalInstance, the game object, and the scripting component match, and we know what this is by looking at its name. So over here, it created a new script file down here in my assets. So I'm going to select this and then drag it over to scripts, just to organize everything nicely. Okay, let's open up scripts then, since we just moved it. And let's double click on GlobalInstance to open it in Visual Studio. I previously had Visual Studio open, and so the load times were pretty fast here. Okay. Now let's think a little bit about this, how the singleton pattern works in programming and what that means for working in Unity. So in programming, a singleton pattern, or the use of a singleton, means that it is one thing that exists outside of everything else. You can't make a copy of it. It is just the one thing. It is a single. So in Unity then, what we want is we want to create a game object that is never deleted. We want to create it. It's going to maintain some data for us as part of its fields, part of its properties of the object, and it's maintained across scenes. Well, that requires us basically knowing a number of different things. Let's start with, since we're writing in C#, thinking about how C# does things. So C# does things by creating objects based on classes. And what we want to do then is we want to use a special keyword to say, hey, this is the only copy of this thing. Luckily, C# has a keyword for that exact purpose called static. The static keyword creates something as a part of a type instead of part of a class. In other words, it says, this is the only thing of this thing. So what we're going to say is inside of GlobalInstance, we're going to create a public, means other things can access it, static, so this won't change, GlobalInstance called instance. Notice the capital I here. So what we've done, and this seems a little bit confusing, is we've created a field that is a property of this object called instance, capital I, so something other things can access. It's public, meaning other code can access it, but it's static, which means once it's created, it won't change, and it will be created one time. So we have something right here, a field called instance of GlobalInstance. So once it's created, we can just say GlobalInstance.instance and then do something with it. The thing we want to do with it is we want to interact with it. But we've sort of developed another interesting problem that has to do with how scenes are handled. So when scenes reload, they reload all of their values. That is, they reload all of their game objects, they call all of their scripts, and things start over again. So if we're moving between the game menu scene and the credits scene, each time we move to a different scene, everything is reloaded, which is exactly what we don't want. We want to be able to say, okay, we want this thing, this global instance, to exist outside of any other scenes and for other scenes to work with it. So we're kind of the way in there. We have a static thing called instance, which means it's part of GlobalInstance. So, okay, that part's good. But now we want to tell Unity to do something. We want to say, okay, when you create an object based on this class, what we want you to do is we want to say the first time this happens, we want to flag this and say never delete this again. And then we want to save all of the current values. Then we want to be able to tell other code to say, hey, anytime you want access to the values I currently have, and in this case, I mean GlobalInstance, anytime you can basically access any of my values and I will just live forever until, the program ends or the game ends. Then we would say, oh, well, if there's a situation where an attempt is made to create this again, go ahead and delete it. So the first time through, we want to say, okay, this is the first time I'm being created. Don't ever destroy me outside of it. Don't destroy me between scene loads. And then any other time an attempt is made to create a new copy of this, go ahead and just destroy it outright. So let's think about this then. Okay, so the very first time this is created, if it's created, then it probably doesn't have to do with start or update, which have to do with frames, which means it has to do with the rendering system. So that's probably not the method we want to use. We want to use a different method called awake. So awake, and notice right here, Unity message, just like start and update, means as soon as this is created, it will call awake. Very first thing called on anything. So when it is awakened, the very first time it is copied or created, do something. What we want to check is when we say, okay, Well, if instance is equal to null, do something. And what are we checking here? Well, up here, we didn't give this a value. Right here by line 8, it's just instance. It's just a possible field or property. But it doesn't have a value. So by default, then, its value is null. So we're saying, okay, the very first time when this is equal to null, we want to do two things. We want to tell Unity to never delete this, and then we want to go ahead and say whatever this currently is. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to call a method called, right here, DontDestroyOnLoad. And notice its little text right here says, do not destroy the target object when loading a new scene. Perfect. This is exactly what we want. When this is created, when the awaken is called, double check, hey, is this the first time? Is instance equal to null? Okay, this is the first time. Don't ever delete this again, right? Create it and never delete it again. So what are we telling it never to delete? Well, we're telling it never to delete GameObject. Where's GameObject coming from? GameObject is the field or property that is associated with the GameObject this scripting component is attached to. So not the scripting component itself, but the GameObject it's a part of. In other words, the global instance GameObject, not this global instance script. So whatever this thing is attached to, and this thing is currently attached to global instance the GameObject, the empty GameObject, keep it around. Don't delete it between scenes. The next thing we want to do, after we've told it never to delete this GameObject it's attached to, is we want to go ahead and update instance. We say instance is equal to this. So what in the world is this line doing? Well, this line right here on line 15 says, okay, very first time through, instance was equal to null. We didn't give it a value. Totally makes sense. Now we want to give it a value. And we say it's equal to this. The this keyword refers to the class itself, all of this right here. So now, into the future, this will never be deleted, and an instance will always be equal to whatever was created as the this keyword, the global instance. In other words, we will, in the future, be able to access globalinstance.instance.something. Whatever we want to value we want to use, we will have access to. So we're preventing this from ever being destroyed, and we're giving it the this keyword. We want to do one more thing. I mentioned before the two different situations, the first time and basically any future time. The first time this is created, we're saying, hey, never destroy this again, and go ahead and save whatever this is. Else, if this is any other time, so the first time, create a copy, never destroy it. If you accidentally attempt to create this again, guess what? Destroy it. Destroy GameObject. So just to be safe, if any other attempt is made to create something on it, just destroy it outright. So the first time it's created, create it, don't ever destroy it again. If something happens, somehow it attempts to create it again, we'll just destroy it outright. And here we'll just move this keyword just to organize this a little bit better. So the very first time when this is equal to null, tell it don't ever destroy this GameObject, set it equal to this. Any other time, destroy it outright. Don't keep it around. We're not going to have multiple copies. It should be single. Singleton should be one of them. We don't actually need the rest of these methods, so I'm going to go ahead and take those out just to organize this a little bit. And then there we have our code, and I'm going to Control S, save this file. We have a global instance class, which has itself a static, right here, field, line 8 property, instance, capital I, that is a global instance. So it's itself, instance is equal to this, which is a global instance. And we're saying, okay, whenever this thing is first created, don't destroy it ever again. Don't destroy the GameObject it's associated with. Go ahead and set it to this. If in case at some point it is equal to anything other than null, or it is equal to anything other than null, go ahead and destroy it. So like I said, first time round, we're going to create it. Don't ever destroy it. If in case something happens, go ahead and just destroy it outright. Fantastic, right? Okay, so far so good. Now we want to actually use this. So we need to add other fields, other properties to this object. So let's go ahead and add something interesting. Let's add public int count. Set it equal to 0. So we have count right here. It is integer value, so it has whole numbers, and it's public, which means other code can access it. So let's move back over here to Unity. Give Unity just a second to load everything. Okay. So we have some code that says whenever this thing is first created, don't ever destroy it. Go ahead and set it to this, and then if something ever happens again, just destroy it outright. Very, very cool. Okay. Well, we have it here, but we're not really doing anything with it. We have our GameObject global instance, which has a script component called GlobalInstance. So, okay, those naming conventions are fine. Let's do something with it. So, okay. Over here in my canvas, I've got a text and a button, or a text, a button, and its own text. Over here for text, right here, I'm going to do something interesting, right? Or actually over here, right? This has already got, the button has already got its own scripting component right here, navigate menu. So since that code already exists down here, let's reopen it so we don't have to add more code. So it's over here. And we say, okay, now every time this button is created, or every time it first renders, we want to say, okay, global instance, count, count, there we go, okay, count, count, plus equal to 1. So what are we saying? We're saying, okay, global instance, which is the game object and class global instance, is instance, so it's static field. And then within that, it's property right here, count, own field, plus equal to 1. So increase this by 1, and I'm going to save this file. So what in the world are we doing right here? We're saying, okay, anytime this scripting component navigate menu, which is attached to a button in both scenes, anytime it runs, the very first time it runs, increase the count by 1. Then the next time the scene loads, or we load another scene, when this thing is started again, increase the count by 1. The effect of this will create something kind of interesting. So let's wait for everything to reload over here in Unity. Okay, and I'm going to save my scene. So save, so everything is saved, and then I want to run this. So when we run this, though, it's not really going to show us anything. So let's put some extra code in down here. Come back over here and say, oh, actually what I want you to do is every time you update this, you want debug, log, and show me the current count. We'll just copy and paste this instead of having to type it again. So update it and then show me the current count in the debug log. So what this means, if everything works correctly, is when we move between scenes, the count will remain outside of, not reset, and then we will see in the debug log and the console for Unity the current count existing outside of any particular scene. So if everything is working correctly, right here, come over here, and let's load this. So, okay, it's loading the menu scene. Let's come over here to console, and we see 1. So count is equal to 1. It got increased from 0 the first time. Come over here and verify, right? Global instance was set to 0. Navigate menu ran 1 time, the first time as part of the game scene. Global instance was increased by 1, and we now see the new adjusted value. Move over to credits. So over here, go to credits. It's now equal to 2 because navigate menu was recreated in a new scene, but the instance was created to 2. Now let's move back to menu, equal to 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, and for however many we want. Pretty cool, right? we've created values that exist outside of any particular scene as part of GlobalInstance.instance something. So whatever global fields, global properties we add to GlobalInstance, we can access through its .instance.something. Let's go ahead and stop this. So over here in GlobalInstance, I'm using count, but this could also be health or lives or settings or anything else we want to exist outside of any particular scene. As long as we make it public, meaning we can access it as we do over here as GlobalInstance, the static version, instance, the single copy of it that exists, and then whatever we want. So GlobalInstance.instance.something, in this case count. Again, it could also be settings or lives or anything else we want. Now, let's take this one more step. So you may have noticed, by the way, that we created this over in menu right here, GlobalInstance, but it didn't exist in credits. In fact, let's verify that. So I'm currently looking at the menu scene. Let's go ahead and assets, open up scenes, open up credits. GlobalInstance is not here. Only exists as part of the menu scene. We told it to never delete, and then we moved to the menu, and it didn't delete, but I'm looking at the menu, and I don't know that that's part of that. So let's help ourselves here. We want to basically remind ourselves that we're using GlobalInstance as part of this scene. So to help us with that, we're going to turn over here. I'm going to reload the menu scene. We're going to turn GlobalInstance, which is a game object that's part of the hierarchy right here, part of this scene, into a prefab. A prefab is an abbreviation for prefabricated, which is a Unity term meaning, hey, save this game object as it is, and we can recreate everything about this game object somewhere else. So it's actually incredibly easy to create a prefab. All we do is click and drag a game object out of the current scene into the project view. So click on game instance, click and drag over here and drop it. Notice it changed color. It says GlobalInstance up here and it changed to blue, matching this. Fantastic. Now let's go ahead and down here in scenes, reopen scenes. And it's reminding me, do I want to save? Yes, I do. Reopen here, go to assets, click and drag GlobalInstance. Now, we didn't need to do that to access GlobalInstance.instance across scripts, across scenes. It will allow us to do that because it's actually part of C# and not Unity. But this is just a good reminder to be like, hey, does this scene use GlobalInstance? Let's go ahead and drop in the prefab. Even though, again, we're not using it, this will just remind us as developers, as authors, that we're looking at the credit scene. We're using GlobalInstance. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save or Control S in Windows. So moving over to a different scene, I'm using GlobalInstance. Moving over to credits, I'm using GlobalInstance. Again, we don't have to do that because C# and Unity will keep track of all that for us. But it's good to just know, hey, am I using GlobalInstance? Yes, I am. Okay, yes, I am. In each scene in which we want access to it, we also add it as a prefab, and so we have access to it. So again, as a quick reminder, we created some code that created a GlobalInstance, a Singleton pattern in programming terms. Over here at the console, and we see 1, 2, and as we saw, we could adjust it over here in any scene, adding or accessing GlobalInstance.instance and whatever we wanted, which again could be health or HP or anything else we want. We just add it to, coming back over here, we just add it right here as a public field to GlobalInstance, in which we access it through GlobalInstance.instance.something. And again, we could update anything, and it could be any values we wanted to track. Much more complex than count. Could be settings, graphical settings, scene names, anything we wanted to track across scenes. It would just become part of this instance, which again, as long as it's created at least once somewhere, and right here we created it during the menu, it exists across the game because we tell Unity right here, DontDestroyOnLoad. And then as a visual reminder to us, we've added as a prefab to every scene just to visually go, oh, right, we're using GlobalInstance to do something in this scene. So it's added to this scene. Lots of complicated concepts going on, but all kind of connected to existing knowledge. Mostly we're just using the static keyword in C# to say, hey, we're creating one thing, and then we're using the DontDestroyOnLoad as part of a special method in Unity to tell something not to destroy a game object, which we created as a prefab and now are just using across scenes. So this has been a review of how to create a singleton pattern, or one approach to creating a singleton pattern within Unity, creating something that exists outside of all scenes and allowing any game object as part of its scripting component to update that across different scenes and to allow us to save something outside of any particular scene.